All right, everyone. Today we're joined by Dave, and Dave, you're going to have to help me with the pronunciation of your last name, but I'll let you do that now, just so we have that out of the way.
Dave Kehnast.
Dave Kehnast. So we're joined today by Dave Kehnast, and Dave's got an incredible story and knows a lot about the opioid crisis. So we're really excited for his input today. And just to kick it off, Dave, I want you to introduce yourself, say anything you want the listeners to know about, and we can go from there.
My name is Dave Kehnast. I live in Southern California. SoCal surf guy. Been coaching human beings for 11 years now, professionally. Love my work, love my job. Really about it.
Great. Well, Dave, the first question our group had for you today is, tell us about your first exposure to drugs, whether it was informational lectures in class or what age was it around? What was your first exposure to drugs, and just explain what that relationship looked like in the beginning.
Well, I mean, the first thing regarding drugs that I encountered had to do was in the 80s, and there were these commercials, this is your brain on drugs. It was Nancy Reagan, it was Just Say No. I remember then there was the DARE program, the DARE program, Drug Awareness Resistance Education, I believe is what it was called. So it was a very typical, don't do drugs, drugs are bad. Don't do drugs, drugs are bad, right? And when you're 9, 10 years old, 11 years old, and you hear don't do drugs, drugs are bad, what you think is I'm not going to do drugs, drugs are bad. And then I was a skater, right, in the late 80s, mid to late 80s, and the skaters didn't do drugs. And so that was kind of like, don't do drugs, drugs are bad. Don't do drugs, drugs are bad. I'm not going to do drugs because these other kids I'm with aren't doing drugs. And so it was almost like a peer pressure not to do drugs. And then some of the skaters started doing drugs, and then all of a sudden, drugs went from, I guess this would be 8th grade, freshman year, drugs went from being this thing I wasn't going to do to all of a sudden, kids are doing drugs, and then so it went from junior high to high school. And so drugs went from being something that I was against to something I wasn't against. And then they turned into something that I kind of wanted to do, like it is with everybody. It's the same old story. Drugs are around, you're going to do them or you're not. That's how it's always been, and I don't see it ever being any different, honestly.
Definitely. And going off that, once you mentioned you started getting involved in different groups that were now into drugs or into the idea of doing drugs, can you kind of pinpoint when opioids come into that? Because drugs doesn't start at the opioid level. I know drugs sometimes start at a recreational level and different levels of, I don't know, detriment to your body. But can you talk about the opioid level and when that really starts coming into play?
Well, yeah, I mean, the first drug was pot, right? It was, for me, my trajectory was pot, acid, which was still very prevalent in the 90s. And then opiates didn't come in until, that would have been, I started getting high on pot in, I guess it was 92, 91 or 92. And then and then I think I had it wasn't until I got to college where people would have Vicodin, you know what I mean? Or I had my wisdom teeth pulled. And so I got some Vicodin, some hydrocodone. And then opiates are still very underneath the radar at that point. I think they'd always been prescribed, and there wasn't the craze around them, you know what I mean? And then it wasn't until I had a snowboarding accident in 2001, and this was there was this guy I knew in the ski town I lived in. This was after college. This is in Steamboat. So this would have been when I lived in Steamboat, Colorado. So this would have been 2000. I want to say 99, 2000. And there was this guy I knew who was the boyfriend of this girl I worked with who fell off a roof and broke his leg in 25 places or something. And he was prescribed OxyContin. And so she would trade them for beers or whatever. You know what I mean? And that was the first time I heard about OxyContin. It was 2001, I want to say. Just probably 2000. And then I had a snowboarding accident myself, and then I was prescribed OxyContin as a result. And this is right at the beginning of OxyContin. Nobody knew what OxyContin was. You didn't hear about OxyContin in the news. There was no epidemic. It kind of went from there. Does that answer your question?
Definitely. And going off that, you mentioned the snowboarding accident. Would you consider your relationship with opioids when you first got prescribed it healthy at that point, or was it out of control at the onset?
No, I mean, dude, as a person that just loved getting high on anything and drunk at everything you could imagine, love getting high on or drunk on anything you could imagine. It was just a new thing, and I don't want to say I can't say that accident took it to the next level. It kind of did. It just gave me more of what I liked. It wasn't until a few years that it got to be really next level.
And can you talk about the next level? What that looked like down the road a few years later once it really...
It went from liking them to needing them.
Okay.
And that would have been in 03 or 04, 02, 03, 04, something like that.
And can you tell me when it changed? Like what was the breaking point, or what was the moment that it clicked and you decided you needed to change?
I decided what?
You needed to change.
Well, I mean, I started having what are referred to as, moments of clarity. I want to say, I mean, the thing about addiction, man, is that I think it's the paradox of it. I think it's a paradox. I think I'm using that word properly. Is that as soon as you realize you want to stop, you can't stop. Right?
Yeah.
And so you'll start to have what are referred to as moments of clarity, right? Where you'll be sitting at the bar drunk, and all of a sudden it will just hit you like a lightning bolt. Like I'm fucked. My life is fucked. Like I can't stop. And then when you start using the opiates kind of at that next level, it doesn't take very long for you to realize that you're in trouble, because the not having them is so profound,
mm-hmm.
Because you're physically, they call it dope sick. Yes, there's this physical need for them, but it's much more than that. It's this kind of like, it's a very deep spiritual unease that your soul encounters, and so the fix for that is the more of the thing that brought it, and so it just becomes this, and you're very, any real opiate addict is very, very, very keenly aware of the trouble they're in. There are very few that are in denial about it, and so it just becomes this shitstorm. You know what I mean? And the quitting requires nothing shy of complete and total spiritual transformation at almost the deepest level possible. It's impossible. Like nothing shy of that will really get you what you need.
Definitely. And
I don't know if I went on a tangent.
No, not at all. And we appreciate your insight. It adds a lot to what we're trying to talk about in terms.
I mean, it's like addiction. It's a spiritual dis-ease,
mm-hmm.
And you'll hear people that, you'll hear intellectuals or academians or whatever you want to call them, talk about it in ways that perhaps discount the spiritual, but it really is a malady of the spirit. It really is, and I personally am of the school of thought that it requires a spiritual solution. It requires an individual to look at themselves and the entire world, and the existence of something greater than them in whole new ways, or else it just doesn't work. That's just my opinion, and I know all kinds of. I've seen people try to do the addiction recovery in a number of different ways, and I find that it has to be attacked, for lack of a better word, spiritually.
Definitely, and that's powerful stuff, I think, for our listeners to take away. And and you put that into action, obviously, with what you're doing with, is it Magic Pieces? Is that how you pronounce it? Or
Magic Pisces?
Magic Pisces. That's you, correct?
Yeah.
So is that part of your life coaching brand?
No, my life coach, I don't do any addiction recovery work at all with my coaching.
Awesome. So,
yeah.
But you've been able to take your experiences from your encounters with drugs and opioids and the whole host of products to be able to put that into action in Magic Pikes, correct?
Well, yeah, it's basically all that addiction recovery taught me is that anything's possible, right? So life coaching is really about anything's possible. And so I when I'm working with someone in their business or their relationship or whatever it is, in the back of my mind or at the forefront of my mind, I guess I should say, I'm aware of what I've been through. And so there's very little that a person can bring to me that's going to convince me that they can't overcome whatever they're facing. You know what I mean?
Definitely. And just to tie up our presentation and what we're trying to look into over the last 10 to 15 years in the opioid crisis, I know you're not doing addiction coaching, but what have you noticed and what's changed over the opioid landscape since you have removed yourself from it and since you've grown out of it?
Well, I mean, opiates have, they have, the thing that people, I don't want to say they fail to realize, but the thing about OxyContin is you're not dealing with anything that's any less severe than heroin at all. Not even sort of. If anything, it's better, right? Because of its purity. And so heroin was this thing that was this dirty thing that was, done in the inner cities that once in a while a high school kid would get addicted to or hooked on, right? And then the opiate, when the OxyContin boom happened, it made it available to everybody. So now you've got someone that has a surgery. This is how it goes down. Someone has a surgery, the doctor gives them too much OxyContin, and then you're not in any pain anymore, and you're still taking it. You don't know why, and that's kind of what the opiate crisis is. It's really a crisis of availability.
Definitely.
It made them available to everybody.
Yeah, and the stats are showing that too. That's increasing the likelihood of overdose and different types of addiction types with opioids. So it's definitely something to look into in terms of trends in the opioid industry, I guess, because it is an industry, which is crazy.
It is what?
It's an industry. It is.
Oh no! It's evil. It kind of comes back to that spiritual component I was putting in. You could argue that it truly is malevolent in nature. And there's that Hannah Arendt article that she wrote after the Holocaust called The Banality of Evil, in which she says that evil energies or evil works through more or less people's ignorance. And I don't want to say that the industry had malevolent intent, but there are a lot of people kind of, for lack of a better way of expressing it, turning a blind eye to what was happening, and then all of a sudden you've just got this problem of epic proportions,
Definitely. Well,
so there's finality at work in it, I think.
No, definitely, most definitely. And Dave, we really appreciate your insights. I think you're going to add a unique and I think beneficial perspective to our project. So I just want to thank you for hopping on and our group as a whole. Thank you.
Yeah, you're super welcome.
Definitely.